Long drives on quiet highways can feel peaceful, but for some truckers, those roads hide things that can't be explained. Ever wonder what it's like to drive through a night that's full of things you can't see, but you know are there? These stories aren't just spooky, they're real, and they'll make you think twice before hitting the road alone. Welcome back to the Horror Shack. Tonight, we'll explore true horror stories for sleep that will keep you on the edge of your seat. But first, we would love you to comment where you're listening from and what time is it currently for you. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more spine-tingling episodes. Now let's get comfy. Story 1. The Encounter at Red Cedar Lot by Marcos Delaney. I don't know if anyone's going to believe me, but I need to get this out. Maybe someone else has experienced something like it, or maybe someone can make sense of it. Either way, here's what happened to me that night at the Red Cedar Lot. I've been a truck driver for almost a decade now. You get used to long hours, empty roads, and some pretty strange sights. But nothing, not the weather, not the late night drunks, not even the weird stuff people leave on the side of the highway, prepared me for this. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and I was dead tired. I'd been running a meet and turn shift, which is just a fancy way of saying you haul a load halfway, meet another driver, swap trailers, and head back. It's routine, boring, but it pays the bills. This time, I was heading to a spot called Red Cedar Lot, a gravel parking lot on the edge of some thick woods. There wasn't much out there, just trees and shadows. No gas station, no restrooms, no lights, just darkness. I pulled in, parked, and shut off the engine. The place was as quiet as you'd expect. No one around, no cars passing by, just the faint hum of the truck cooling off and the soft rustle of the wind in the trees. I had about an hour before the other driver was supposed to show up, so I figured I'd lean back and close my eyes for a bit. Nothing unusual. I'd done it 100 times before. Now here's where things get weird. I wasn't out long, maybe 10-15 minutes, when something woke me up. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe a critter scurrying by, but then I heard it again, a scratching noise. Not loud, but persistent, like claws scraping against something solid. My first thought was a raccoon or a stray dog sniffing around the truck. They're not uncommon in spots like this. So, I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and glanced out the driver's side window. Nothing. It was just darkness out there. The trees swayed a little in the breeze, and the gravel lot stretched out, empty as far as I could see. But the sound was still there, faint but steady, coming from somewhere near the back of the truck. My heart was pounding a little now, not from fear, but from that kind of uneasy feeling you get when something doesn't quite add up. You know the feeling, right? Like, your brain's trying to explain it away, but your gut's telling you something's off. I grabbed my flashlight from the console and stepped out of the cab. The air was cooler than I expected, and for a second, I thought about just getting back inside and locking the doors. But curiosity got the better of me. I walked around to the back of the trailer, shining the light along the sides as I went. Nothing. The lot was completely empty, no sign of animals, no people, nothing. Then I heard it again, the scratching. This time, it was louder, and it wasn't coming from the ground. It sounded like it was coming from the trailer itself, like something or someone was inside. I froze. Now, I'm not one to scare easily, but let me tell you, standing there in the middle of that dark lot, with only the beam of my flashlight and that scratching noise, yeah, it got to me. I had half a mind to just get back in the truck and wait it out, but the other half, the stubborn half, decided to check it out. I mean, what if it was an animal trapped inside? Or worse, what if someone had broken in while I was asleep? I climbed up to the back of the trailer, flashlight shaking a little in my hand, and unlatched the doors. Slowly, I swung one of them open and pointed the light inside. Empty. Completely empty. The scratching had stopped too. All I could hear was my own breathing and the faint rustling of the wind outside. I stood there for a minute, just staring into the darkness of the trailer. trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the noise was the wind after all, or maybe I was just overtired. But then, just as I was about to close the door and head back to the cab, I heard something behind me. It wasn't scratching this time. It was a low, guttural growl, deep and raspy, like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was close, too close. I spun around, flashlight sweeping across the lot, but I couldn't see anything. The growl came again, louder this time, and I swear, it felt like it was coming from everywhere at once, like the sound was bouncing off the trees and the truck and the trailer. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. Just that growl, echoing in the stillness. I don't know why, but I didn't run. Maybe I was too scared to move, or maybe some part of me didn't want to turn my back on whatever was out there. I just stood there, flashlight shaking in my hand, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. And then I saw it. I saw a movement in the shadows, just at the edge of the flashlight's beam. It was quick, so quick I almost doubted myself, but it was there. Something darted between the trees, low to the ground, almost like an animal. My breath hitched. I adjusted the flashlight, trying to follow whatever it was, but the beam wasn't strong enough to cut through the darkness. My first thought was, asterisk, it's a dog. It has to be a dog, asterisk. I kept telling myself that, trying to stay calm. Dogs growl, they scratch, they skulk around in places like this. But then, why did it feel so wrong? Why did the sound of that growl make my skin crawl? And why couldn't I shake the feeling that I wasn't just being watched? I was being hunted. I decided to head back to the truck. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to stick around long enough to find out. As I turned to climb back into the cab, I heard the growl again. This time it was closer. Too close. My legs froze in place, and my brain started firing off every alarm it had. Fight or flight. But I couldn't fight something I couldn't see, and my truck was the only safe place I could think of. I forced myself to move, gripping the door handle and pulling myself up into the cab as fast as I could. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't even bother with the flashlight. I just sat there, staring out into the darkness, trying to catch my breath. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There, just outside the circle of light cast by the truck's headlights, was a shape. It was crouched low, almost blending in with the shadows, but I could just make out the outline of a figure. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't an animal at all. It was a person. At least, it looked like a person. I leaned forward, squinting to get a better look. The figure was still crouched, its head tilted at an odd angle, as if it were studying me. My stomach twisted into knots. Who the hell would be out here at this hour, in the middle of nowhere? And why were they acting like that? Then it moved. It didn't stand up, not fully. It stayed low, its movements jerky and unnatural, almost like it was crawling. My mouth went dry as I watched it inch closer to the truck, one slow, deliberate step at a time. It was still too far away for me to make out its face, but I didn't need to see it to know something was wrong. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. I reached for the ignition, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the key. The engine roared to life, and I thought, thank God, but as I shifted into gear, the figure bolted. I'm not exaggerating when I say it moved faster than any person should be able to. 1 second it was at the edge of the lot, and the next it was right in front of my truck, its body pressed up against the hood. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. The headlights caught it in full view now, and what I saw, I'll never forget it. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was gaunt, his clothes tattered and hanging off his bony frame. But it was his face that stopped me cold. His mouth was open, wide enough to look unnatural, and his teeth didn't look right. They were jagged, almost animalistic, and his eyes, God, his eyes. They didn't look human. They were too wide, too shiny, and there was something in them that made my blood run cold. He started banging on the hood, hard enough to make the whole truck shake. His hands were filthy, his nails broken and caked with dirt, and the way he moved, it was like he wasn't in control of his own body, like something else was driving him. He let out a sound, half growl, half scream, that made every hair on my body stand on end. I didn't think, I just acted. I threw the truck into reverse and hit the gas, the tires spinning on the gravel as I backed away from him. But he didn't stop. He ran after the truck, his movements so erratic it was like watching a puppet with its strings tangled. He was fast, faster than he had any right to be, and no matter how far I reversed, he stayed right there, slamming his fists against the grill. I was shaking so hard I could barely think, but I knew I had to get out of there. I shifted into drive, floored the gas, and swerved around him, the truck lurching as it picked up speed. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I thought I'd made it. I thought I was safe. But then, in the rearview mirror, I saw him. He was running down the middle of the road, chasing the truck, and somehow, impossibly, he was keeping up. My eyes were glued to the rearview mirror, heart racing like it might pound out of my chest. The man, or whatever he was, kept pace with my truck, his arms flailing wildly as he ran. The headlights behind me were just enough to illuminate him, and what I saw was more horrifying than anything I could have imagined. His gait wasn't normal. His limbs moved in ways they shouldn't, like his joints weren't working right, bending and twisting unnaturally with each step. His head lolled to one side, his mouth still gaping wide, exposing those awful, jagged teeth. It was like watching a nightmare in motion, something that shouldn't exist in real life. I pressed the gas harder, pushing the truck to its limit. The engine roared and the speedometer climbed, but when I glanced back in the mirror again, he was still there. Closer even. How was he keeping up? I was going at least 50 miles per hour now, but it didn't seem to matter. He wasn't just running. He was sprinting, closing the gap like some kind of predator. Panic clawed at my chest. My mind raced with questions I didn't have answers for. Who was this guy? Was he even human? How was he doing this? And, more importantly, what did he want with me? I fumbled for my phone, nearly dropping it as I pulled it from the cup holder. My fingers trembled so badly, I could barely unlock the screen. I didn't even know who to call. 911? My dispatcher? I doubted I'd be able to explain what was happening without sounding like a complete lunatic. But before I could make a decision, I heard a loud thud. My heart stopped. The sound hadn't come from inside the truck. It had come from the roof. I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt as gravel sprayed out behind me. The sudden stop sent me lurching forward, my seatbelt locking tight across my chest. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the engine idling and my own ragged breathing. Then another thud, and another. He was on the roof. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He must have leapt onto the truck when I wasn't looking, somehow managing to cling to the roof at high speeds. I didn't even think that was possible. It defied all logic, but logic had clearly left the building a long time ago. I stayed frozen in my seat, too scared to move. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but I was paralyzed. I could hear him up there, shuffling around, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. Every step sent vibrations through the cab, and it felt like he was searching for a way in. That's when I heard the scratching. It started faint, almost like fingernails on glass, but quickly grew louder. He was clawing at the roof, dragging his nails across the metal like he was trying to tear his way inside. My stomach churned at the sound. It was like nails on a chalkboard, amplified tenfold. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to act. I shifted the truck into drive and floored it again, swerving side to side in an attempt to shake him off. The truck groaned under the strain, tires screeching as I whipped the wheel back and forth. But no matter how hard I tried, he stayed put. His grip was unrelenting, and the scratching didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Then, without warning, he slammed his fist against the windshield. The impact was so sudden and violent that I let out a scream. The glass didn't shatter, but it cracked, spiderwebbing out from the point of impact. He hit it again, harder this time, and the crack spread even further. I could see him now, his face pressed up against the glass, his wide, unblinking eyes staring directly into mine. I can't even describe the look on his face. It wasn't anger or malice exactly. It was hunger. Pure, unfiltered hunger. Like he saw me as prey, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. I swerved hard to the right, the truck lurching dangerously as I nearly lost control. The sudden movement finally did the trick. He slid off the roof, disappearing from view with a sickening thud as he hit the ground. I didn't stop to check if he was okay. I didn't even look back. I just kept driving, my foot pressed so hard on the gas pedal it felt like it might go through the floor. The road ahead was a blur, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. All I could think about was getting as far away from that lot as possible. I didn't care where I ended up, as long as it wasn't there. But even as I drove, my paranoia didn't let up. Every shadow, every movement in the trees felt like him, like he was still out there, watching, waiting. It wasn't until I reached a well-lit truck stop miles down the highway that I finally dared to pull over. My whole body was trembling as I climbed out of the cab, my legs barely able to hold me up. I needed to see the truck, to prove to myself that it was over, that he was gone. But what I found made my blood run cold. There were scratches, deep, jagged gouges all over the roof and hood, like someone, or something, had tried to tear the truck apart. And in the center of the windshield, right where his face had been, was a handprint. It was faint, but it was there, smeared into the glass like it had been burned in. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the damage, my mind racing. None of it made sense. No human could do this. No human could move like that, or cling to a truck at those speeds, or leave marks like these. But if he wasn't human, then what was he? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My hands were still shaking as I reached for my phone, the cold metal of the screen feeling foreign in my clammy grip. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had just happened. I glanced around the truck stop, hoping to see someone who could help, but it was quiet, too quiet. Deciding against calling my dispatcher or 911, I opted for a more local approach. I walked into the small convenience store, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The store was mostly empty, just a few late-night customers browsing the shelves or chatting quietly in the corner. The cashier, an older man with a kind face, looked up as I approached the counter. "Evening," he greeted, his voice calm and steady. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I need some help. Can I talk to you for a minute?" He nodded, pulling out a stool for me. "Sure thing. What's going on?" I took a seat, feeling the weight of my exhaustion pressing down on me. I just had the weirdest experience at Red Cedar lot. I was waiting for a fellow driver to swap loads, and something or someone attacked my truck. It moved unnaturally fast, almost like it was something else. "Look," I gestured to the truck, which was still parked at the lot. The man followed my gaze, his eyes widening slightly. "That's intense. Are you okay?" I shrugged, trying to appear composed. "I think so, but I need to figure out what happened. Do you know anything about that area? Any strange occurrences or local legends?" He thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Red Cedar lot? Yeah, I've heard some stories. It's pretty isolated, surrounded by those woods. Some folks say it's haunted, but I never believed in that stuff. Mostly it's just a quiet place for truckers like you." I frowned. On it? I wasn't seeing ghosts, though. It was something else. Someone, or something, was attacking my truck. The cashier hesitated, then leaned in closer. There have been some strange sightings around those woods. People talk about a man who roams the area late at night. They say he's lost, or that he can't find his way out of the forest. Some say he's been dead for years, but others think he's just strange. I felt a chill run down my spine. Do you think that could be what I saw? Some kind of ghost or something? He shrugged. Maybe. Or it could be something else entirely. I don't know. People tend to embellish stories when they don't have all the facts. If you're serious about finding out, you might want to talk to the local sheriff. He's heard similar reports, I think. I nodded, feeling a bit more hopeful. Thanks. I appreciate it. I left the store and made my way back to the truck, my mind buzzing with questions. I decided to call the sheriff's department, hoping to get some clarity on what I'd experienced. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered. Red Cedar Sheriff's Department, Officer Daniels speaking. How can I help you? Hi, officer. My name is Marcos Delaney. I'm a truck driver, and I had a really strange and frightening experience last night at Red Cedar Lot. I wanted to see if there have been any reports, or if you could shed some light on what might have happened. There was a brief pause before Officer Daniels responded. Marcos, I've heard a few things, but nothing concrete. Some drivers have mentioned seeing a lone figure wandering near the lot, especially around this time of night. It's been mostly dismissed as tiredness or imagination, but I'll look into it. Can you describe exactly what happened? I recounted the events, the barking noise, the figure outside the truck, the relentless pursuit, the scratches, and the handprint on the windshield. Officer Daniels listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. That's definitely unusual, Marcos. I'll file a report and have someone come out to inspect the area. In the meantime, I'd recommend avoiding that lot if possible, especially at night. And keep your phone handy in case you encounter anything else. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. I knew I couldn't just forget about what had happened. The scratches on my truck were fresh, and that handprint seemed almost symbolic, a mark that wasn't just physical but something etched into my memory. Determined to get some answers, I decided to investigate further. The next morning, I returned to Red Cedar Lot, this time with my truck parked securely and no intention of meeting another driver. The area was still as desolate as ever, the dense woods surrounding the lot like silent sentinels. I walked around the truck, examining the scratches more closely. They were deep and jagged, as if clawed by something with tremendous strength. As I circled to the back of the truck, I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint trail of dirt leading from the back of the truck into the woods. My curiosity piqued. I followed the trail, my footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. The forest was thick, the canopy above blocking out most of the daylight. I moved cautiously, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs setting my nerves on edge. After about 10 minutes, the trail led me to a small clearing. In the center stood an old, abandoned cabin, its windows broken and the door hanging ajar. I had never noticed it before, but it seemed to have been there for as long as the lot existed. The air around it was unnaturally still, and an unsettling feeling settled over me. I approached the cabin, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a cluttered interior. Old furniture covered in dust, cobwebs stretching across the room, and signs of long abandonment. But what caught my attention was a strange symbol etched into the wooden floor, an intricate pattern that seemed almost ritualistic in nature. I knelt down, examining the symbol more closely. It resembled a combination of geometric shapes and something resembling animalistic claws. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of it. Had I stumbled upon something intentional, or was it just another oddity of the area? Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the back of the cabin, causing me to jump. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I strained to listen, but all I could hear was my own breathing and the distant sounds of the forest. Deciding it was nothing, I stood up, intending to leave. As I turned to go, something caught my eye, a faded photograph lying on a table. I picked it up, wiping away the dust. It was a picture of a man, much like the figure I had seen, standing beside a truck identical to mine. The man had the same gaunt features and unsettling eyes. Below the photo was a handwritten note. "Always keep watch. Never let him out." A chill ran down my spine. What did that mean? Who was that man? And why did he resemble the figure that attacked me? I felt a presence behind me and spun around. But the room was empty. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath misting in the dim light. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed the photograph and bolted out of the cabin, the door slamming shut behind me. My legs pumped as I sprinted back to my truck, the eerie silence of the woods pressing in around me. When I reached the vehicle, I glanced back at the cabin, but it was as if it had vanished, leaving no trace of its existence. Shaken but determined, I returned to the truck stop to make sense of everything. Officer Daniels was there, waiting for me. I showed him the photograph and explained my discovery at the cabin. He examined the photo carefully, his expression unreadable. "This is strange, Marcos. I'll need to look into this more. There's no record of this man or that cabin in our files. It's possible that something happened here a long time ago that's been forgotten or overlooked." I nodded, feeling a mixture of frustration and fear. I need to know what that was. If it's something dangerous, I want to make sure no one else goes through what I did. Officer Daniels placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We'll investigate further. In the meantime, try to stay safe and avoid that area if you can. And if you notice anything else unusual, don't hesitate to reach out." Days passed, and the incident at Red Cedar lot became the talk of the local trucking community. Some drivers shared their own eerie experiences, while others dismissed it as mere superstition. But for me, the memory lingered, a constant reminder of that terrifying night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching me, waiting for another chance. My nights were restless, haunted by vivid dreams of the gaunt figure and the ominous symbol from the cabin. I started noticing things, small scratches on my truck that I didn't remember making, strange noises in the middle of the night, and fleeting shadows just beyond my peripheral vision. One evening, about a week after the incident, I received a call from Officer Daniels. "Marcos, we found something. It's about that cabin you found." I met him at the sheriff's office, my anxiety palpable. He handed me a set of old documents and photographs. We did some digging, and it turns out that Red Cedar lot was once the site of a logging camp. There was an accident about 20 years ago. A man named Thomas Hargrove was in charge. He was known to be a bit eccentric, obsessed with making his operations more efficient. I flipped through the photos, recognizing the truck from the picture I found. What happened to him? Officer Daniels sighed. After the accident, Thomas disappeared. Some say he was killed. Others believe he went insane and wandered into the woods. There have been reports of sightings ever since, but nothing concrete. The cabin you found wasn't on any official maps, but it was a part of the old campgrounds. It seems like Thomas left some kind of mark here. I stared at the documents, trying to piece it all together. Do you think Thomas is still out there? Is that why he was chasing me? The officer nodded grimly. It's hard to say. Some believe his spirit, or whatever remains of him, is bound to this place, reliving his last moments. Others think there might be something more to his disappearance. Whatever it is, it's clear that he hasn't moved on. I felt a chill settle over me. What can I do? How do I stop this? We need to perform a proper investigation, possibly even a cleansing of the area to lay whatever remains of Thomas to rest. But until then, I'd advise you to stay as far away from Red Cedar lot as possible. I agreed, feeling a sense of helplessness wash over me. How could I just forget about what had happened? The scratches, the handprint, the photograph, they were all too real. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to every sound outside my window. The familiar noises of the night, seemed amplified, each rustle of leaves and distant call of an owl making me jump. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but the fear lingered. A few days later, Officer Daniels contacted me again. "We're planning a team to investigate Red Cedar lot tomorrow night. We could use your help, especially since you've experienced firsthand what's going on." I hesitated, the memory of that night still fresh and terrifying. But I knew I couldn't just ignore it. "All right, I'll be there." The next evening, I joined the sheriff's team, consisting of Officer Daniels, a couple of deputies, and a local historian named Linda. She had extensive knowledge of the area's history and was eager to help us understand what we might be dealing with. We arrived at Red Cedar lot just before midnight, the moon casting an eerie glow over the desolate area. The woods loomed around us, their shadows dancing in the faint light. The old cabin was nowhere to be seen, as if it had retreated back into the depths of the forest. "We're here to find any signs of Thomas and see if there's a way to put this to rest," Linda explained, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. We split into pairs, combing the lot and surrounding woods for any clues. The air was thick with anticipation, each of us acutely aware of the silence that enveloped the area. My mind kept drifting back to the photograph and the symbol from the cabin, wondering if there were more secrets hidden here. After what felt like hours of searching, Linda called us over. "I think I found something," she said, pointing to a patch of ground near the edge of the lot. There were fresh footprints, more recent than the old logging tracks, leading deeper into the woods. I felt a surge of adrenaline. "We need to follow them," I said, eager to uncover more. As we trailed the footprints, the forest seemed to close in around us. The canopy above was dense, blocking out most of the moonlight and making the path barely visible. Every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves heightened our senses, the fear of encountering whatever had attacked me keeping us on high alert. After about 20 minutes, we arrived at a clearing I recognized from my earlier exploration, the site where the cabin had been. To my surprise, the structure was gone, replaced by a more natural clearing. But something felt off. The ground was disturbed, as if something had been dragged across it. "We need to be careful," Linda cautioned, her eyes scanning the area. "There's something here, and it might not want us here either." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the edge of the clearing. We all froze, hearts pounding. The sound was followed by a guttural growl, deep and resonant, unlike anything natural. Without thinking, we turned towards the sound, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. And there he was, Thomas Hargrove, or whatever remained of him, stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes glowing unnaturally in the dim light. His form was gaunt and emaciated, his clothes tattered and torn. He looked more like a specter than a man, his presence both sorrowful and menacing. "Stay back," Officer Daniels commanded, stepping forward with his gun drawn. But Thomas didn't seem aggressive, just lost and tormented. "Thomas," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay? What do you want?" He didn't respond, but his posture softened slightly, almost as if he recognized me. The fear that had gripped me earlier was now mingled with a sense of pity. This wasn't just some malevolent entity. This was a man, trapped and seeking something. Linda stepped forward, holding up the photograph I had found. "Thomas, is this you? Do you know what happened here?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Thomas approached us, his movements hesitant. As he drew closer, I could see the pain etched into his features, the torment in his eyes. He reached out a trembling hand, pointing towards the deeper woods. "I need to go home," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Help me find my way." Officer Daniels lowered his weapon slightly, sensing the desperation in Thomas's plea. "We're here to help, Thomas. Show us what you need." Thomas nodded, turning and leading us through the forest. The deeper we went, the more the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, and an oppressive silence settled around us. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, watching our every move. After what felt like an eternity, we arrived at a small, hidden glade. In the center stood a stone altar, covered in the same symbol I had seen etched into the cabin floor. The ground around it was scorched, the earth cracked and barren. "This is where it happened," Linda explained, her voice heavy with understanding. "The accident that killed Thomas and probably a few others. It was supposed to be a logging accident, but something went terribly wrong." Thomas approached the altar, his eyes fixed on it. "I was trying to make things right," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I thought if I could just finish the work, bring the camp back to life, everything would be okay. But it wasn't. Now I can't leave." I stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thomas, you need to let go. It's time to move on." He looked at me, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of pain. "I can't. Not until I fix what I started." Linda took out her notebook, jotting down everything she saw. "There must be a way to help you, Thomas. Maybe a ritual or something that can release you from this place." Thomas shook his head, his body trembling. "I don't know how. It's been so long, and everything has changed." I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of responsibility. "Maybe we can figure it out together. You helped me once. Maybe you can help us now." There was a moment of silence before Thomas nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll try." We spent the next few hours working together, trying to decipher the symbol and understand what needed to be done to free Thomas from his torment. It was a difficult process, filled with setbacks and moments of despair, but slowly, we began to make progress. As dawn approached, we finally completed the ritual, a combination of prayers, symbolic gestures, and the burning of sage to cleanse the area. Thomas stood by the altar, his form beginning to shimmer and fade. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude and relief. "I can finally rest." With that, he disappeared, leaving behind a sense of peace that had been missing for decades. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the woods seemed less foreboding, as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Officer Daniels, Linda, and I stood in silence, processing what had just happened. It was a surreal moment, one that defied explanation, but felt undeniably right. "We did it," Linda said softly, a hint of awe in her voice. I nodded, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "Yeah, we did." As we made our way back to the truck, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the trees, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The nightmares began to fade, replaced by a newfound peace. Red Cedar Lot was no longer a place of fear for me. It was a place where a lost soul had found his way home. A few weeks later, the sheriff's department officially closed the case. Reports of strange sightings ceased, and the stories of the ghostly trucker became a thing of the past. I resumed my driving routes, though I couldn't help but feel a lingering connection to Red Cedar Lot and the man I had helped. One night, as I was pulling into a rest stop similar to Red Cedar Lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There, standing a few feet away, was a man in a trucker's jacket, giving me a thumbs up before turning and disappearing into the darkness. I smiled, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. It was a reminder that sometimes, even in the darkest places, there's a chance for redemption and peace. And while the memory of that terrifying night would always stay with me, I knew that I had done the right thing. Driving away, I couldn't help but wonder how many other stories were out there, waiting to be told. And maybe, just maybe, I could help give closure to those who couldn't find their way on their own. But for now, I was content knowing that Red Cedar Lot was finally at peace, and so was I. If you are currently enjoying this story, pause the video and please subscribe to the Horror Shack, and make sure you like this video and leave us a comment saying I am enjoying the story, as this would help us get feedback and also encourage us to tell more true spine-chilling stories like this one. Now, let's continue the story. Story 2. The haunting road called Route 66. Do you ever get that feeling when you're alone on the road, and it's so quiet, it feels like the world's just holding its breath? That's what it's like out there on Route 66 at night. I've been driving that stretch for close to 20 years, and let me tell you, I've seen some things. Things I can't shake, no matter how hard I try. I always tell people, driving at night has its perks. The roads are clear, no one to cut you off or tailgate, just miles and miles of open highway. But there's a flip side to that quiet, a stillness that can get under your skin if you're not careful. Ever notice how the dark makes everything feel different? Even things that seem normal in daylight. Take Route 66, for example. It's an iconic road, sure. Everyone's heard of it. During the day, it's all vintage diners and quirky roadside attractions. But at night, it's just you, your headlights, and whatever lies beyond them. I used to think I was imagining things when I first started noticing them. Figures on the side of the road, just walking, always walking. Who walks out there, miles from anything? I'd glance at them as I passed. Sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, sometimes even a kid. They never hitchhiked, never waved. They just kept going one step at a time like they didn't even see me. Now, I'll admit, at first I didn't think much of it. People do weird things, right? Maybe their car broke down. Maybe they were out exploring and lost track of time. But here's the thing, it wasn't just once or twice. It started happening more often, always in the same way, always at night, and always when I was alone out there. You ever wonder why someone would be out in the middle of nowhere at that hour? What are they walking toward? Or maybe, what are they walking away from? There's one night that sticks with me more than any other. I was driving a late shift, hauling a load of machinery from Chicago to a spot outside LA. The moon was almost full, lighting up the desert in that weird silver glow. It was just me on the highway, no other cars in sight. I hadn't seen a gas station or rest stop in hours, and honestly, I wasn't even sure how much farther it'd be until the next one. And then I saw him. At first, it was just a shape in the distance, right along the white line. As I got closer, the shape turned into a man. He was tall, wearing a suit that looked like it had seen better days. Frayed at the cuffs, torn at the shoulder. He was carrying a briefcase, of all things, one of those old leather ones with the brass clasps. He wasn't walking fast, but he wasn't shuffling either. Just steady. I slowed down as I passed him, trying to get a better look. He didn't turn his head or even glance in my direction. His face was pale, almost gray, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. His eyes, though, his eyes were what got me. They were fixed on the road ahead, but there was something off about them. They didn't blink. Not once. I should have kept driving. I don't know why I didn't. Something about him. Maybe it was that suit, or maybe the way he was walking, like he had all the time in the world, just got under my skin. I told myself it was the decent thing to do. You see someone out there, miles from anything, looking like they don't belong, you at least ask if they're okay, right? That's what I kept telling myself as I eased my truck to the shoulder and came to a stop about 50 yards ahead of him. The engine rumbled as I sat there for a moment, my fingers drumming on the wheel. I'll be honest, I didn't really want to get out. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. But then I thought about what my dad used to say. Asterisk son, you don't leave a man stranded. Doesn't matter where you are or what time it is. Asterisk. So I grabbed my flashlight, opened the door, and stepped out. The desert air hit me, dry and cool, and the only sound was the faint hum of the truck's engine. It was quiet out there. Too quiet. I called out to him as I walked toward him. Hey buddy, you need some help? He didn't answer, didn't even flinch, just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, like he hadn't heard me. That should have been my second warning. I kept walking toward him, the gravel crunching under my boots. My flashlight beam swept over the road, and the scrubby brush on either side. When I was about 10 feet away, I stopped. "Hey," I tried again, louder this time. "You okay, man? Need a ride or something?" He stopped walking. For a second, I thought he was going to turn around, but he didn't. He just stood there, facing forward, the briefcase hanging loosely at his side. His back was to me, and I could see now that his suit wasn't just torn. It was filthy, covered in dust, maybe dirt, like he'd been dragged through the desert. Something about the way he stood there, so still, made my skin crawl. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing these faint sounds. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It was softer, like whispering. The kind of sound you can't really place, but you know it's there. At first, I tried to ignore it. Old buildings make weird noises, right? Pipes rattle, wood creaks, the wind sneaks through cracks. But this wasn't like that. It felt deliberate, like it was happening just to get my attention. I turned on the bedside lamp and sat up, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing it. That's when I noticed something odd. The mirror on the dresser across the room. It was foggy, like someone had just breathed on it, but I hadn't been anywhere near it. I got up to check, thinking maybe there was a draft. When I wiped the glass with my sleeve, I saw it. A handprint. Not just any handprint, though. It was small, like a child's hand, and it was inside the glass, as if someone had pressed their palm from the other side of the mirror. My stomach tightened. I told myself it must have been there all along, that I just hadn't noticed it before. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I went back to bed, pulled the covers up to my chin, and stared at the ceiling, refusing to look at the mirror again. The whispering stopped after a while, or maybe I was just too exhausted to hear it anymore. Either way, I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I decided to distract myself by exploring more of the inn. Staying cooped up in my room wasn't doing me any favors. The hallways were eerily quiet, like I was the only person in the whole building. I passed by a few doors, all of them shut tight. I remember wondering if there were any other guests, or if I really was alone. As I made my way downstairs, I noticed a door I hadn't seen before. It was slightly ajar, with a dim light spilling out from the crack. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed it open. Inside was a small office, cluttered with papers and old photographs. There was a ledger on the desk, its leather cover cracked with age. I flipped it open, expecting to see a list of guest names, but what I found was unsettling. The names were written in neat, looping handwriting, but every so often, one would be crossed out with thick, black ink. Next to some of the crossed out names were dates. Always just a day or two after the person had checked in. I ran my finger down the list, feeling a growing sense of dread. Near the bottom of the page, I saw something that made my heart stop. My name. It was written in the same elegant handwriting, with today's date listed next to it. I slammed the book shut and backed out of the room, my hands shaking. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light, every distant sound, it all felt wrong. That evening, I decided to leave. Whatever peace I'd been hoping to find here, it wasn't worth this creeping sense of dread. But when I tried to check out, the woman at the front desk just smiled at me in that unnerving way of hers. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think I need to cut my trip short." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes darkened. "I'm afraid that's not possible," she said. "What do you mean?" "We have a strict policy," she replied, her tone as sweet as honey. "Once you check in, you can't leave until your stay is complete." My chest tightened. "What does that mean?" "You'll see," she said, and before I could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing through a door behind the counter. That night, I locked my door and pushed the dresser in front of it for good measure. I don't know what I thought that would accomplish, but it made me feel a little safer. Sleep was out of the question. I sat in bed with my back against the headboard, clutching my phone like it was some kind of lifeline. I turned off the engine, but the silence was even worse now. The night seemed to press in on me, the stillness too thick, like it was hiding something. I didn't even notice the man in the doorway until he spoke. "You shouldn't have stopped." My blood ran cold. I didn't turn to look at him, not at first. I knew it was him before I even saw him. The voice was the same, that low, hollow whisper. But this time, he wasn't walking down the road. This time, he was standing right there just outside the diner, as if he had been waiting for me. The breath caught in my throat, and I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers began to cramp. I had to get out of there. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. The shadow behind me wasn't just one shadow. It was two. At first, I thought I was seeing things. The light from the diner wasn't enough to make sense of what I was seeing. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. There were figures moving in the shadows, just outside the reach of the headlights. They were tall, too tall to be ordinary people, and their movements were wrong, like they were gliding more than walking. I quickly turned off the headlights, hoping they wouldn't see me, but it was too late. One of them, the one closest to my truck, tilted its head toward the diner, and I saw its eyes. They weren't like the man's eyes, no. These were darker, colder, and they seemed to know everything. Everything about me, about the road, about the fear crawling up my spine. I didn't wait for them to come any closer. I slammed the truck into gear and sped out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the cracked asphalt. My eyes never left the rearview mirror. The road was empty. The figures were gone, but they weren't. I kept driving, my mind spinning, racing to make sense of what had just happened. I thought I had shaken it off, but the fear wouldn't go away. The truck felt heavier now, like it was carrying something I couldn't see. Or maybe something was carrying me. I thought about pulling over again, trying to calm myself, but I couldn't. My thoughts were jumbled, and the need to get away, to put as many miles between myself and whatever this was, drove me forward. The desert stretched on in front of me, an endless expanse of nothing. I tried calling the dispatcher, told them I was having a problem with the load. They told me to pull over and take a break, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. I wasn't about to stop again, not after what happened. I thought I was imagining it, thought maybe it was just the stress of the road, the long hours catching up with me. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't alone. The whole night passed in a blur. I don't know how many miles I drove, only that I kept my foot on the gas, not wanting to stop, not wanting to let my guard down. The world outside was pitch black, and every little sound made me jump. The engine's hum, the wind, the occasional squeak of the truck's frame. It all seemed too loud, like the night was trying to tell me something. But what? Eventually, I reached a stretch of road I recognized, a familiar stretch that ran through the outskirts of a small town I hadn't visited in years. It was just after dawn, and the first light of day painted the sky in shades of purple and orange. The world seemed to relax, but not me. I couldn't let myself relax. I thought I had outrun whatever was following me. I thought I had escaped, but as I passed a worn-out billboard, I saw something that made my stomach twist. A shadow, standing right at the edge of the road, just on the other side of the guardrail. It was tall, too tall like it didn't belong, and the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't just standing there. It was watching me. I slammed my foot on the brake, the tires screeching as I brought the truck to a halt. My hands were shaking. I tried to breathe, tried to clear my mind, but there was no denying it anymore. I wasn't just being paranoid. These things, these shadow striders, weren't just figments of my imagination. They were real, and they were hunting me. I didn't know what to do. There was no one out here, no one who could help. Just me and the desert stretching out, endless and empty. But as I sat there, frozen, I saw something that nearly made my blood freeze. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. Two more figures, coming out from behind the trees that lined the road. They weren't walking, not exactly. They were gliding, moving in a way that didn't make sense, like they were floating just above the ground. That's when I knew. They were coming for me. My heart was pounding in my chest, the sound deafening in the quiet of the truck. I kept my eyes fixed on the shadowy figures as they moved, slowly, deliberately, their limbs unnaturally long and thin, casting eerie silhouettes against the dim glow of the early morning sky. I could feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck, and the hairs on my arms stood up. There was no way in hell I was going to stay here, not with those things out there, not after everything I'd already seen. I jammed the truck into reverse, my hands shaking so hard I almost couldn't grip the gear shift. The tires spun as I backed up too quickly, jerking the truck into an unstable sway. I didn't care. I just needed to get away from them. The truck bucked, and I slammed my foot back on the gas, spinning it around in a 180-degree turn. The engine roared to life, and I peeled down the highway again, my foot planted on the accelerator like it was the only thing holding me together. But even as I pushed the truck faster, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were right there, in the darkness behind me, their eyes fixed on my every move. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. There was nothing there, but I knew, deep down, that they were still following me. Those things weren't just walking down the road. They were tracking me, hunting me, and they weren't going to stop. The road ahead was a blur, the lines of the highway twisting and turning like they had a mind of their own. I felt dizzy, like I was losing control of everything. My mind kept drifting back to that first encounter. The man in the tattered suit with the briefcase. That smile. I had thought he was the source of all this, the one thing I couldn't explain. But now I knew. There was something bigger at play here. Something ancient, something that didn't belong in this world. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I'd been seeing them for years. The figures on the side of the road, the ones I always tried to ignore. I'd seen them walking too, just like that man. Sometimes they looked like travelers, other times like drifters. But no matter how many times I passed them, they never reacted, never even acknowledged my truck as it rushed past them at 80 miles per hour. At the time, I thought it was just the weirdness of the road, the loneliness that comes with driving through stretches of land where no one else seemed to be around. But now I saw it all. They were never just people. They were something else, something that followed the road, just like I did. And once I'd seen them, really seen them, there was no going back. The thought made my skin crawl. I didn't want to look behind me again, but I had to. I couldn't help myself. I reached for the mirror, but this time, I didn't see just shadows. I saw movement, more figures, more than before, moving in unison across the road behind me, emerging from the darkness like specters in the night. I slammed on the brakes. The truck jolted forward, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The road ahead was still empty, still stretching out into infinity, but it didn't feel that way anymore. It felt suffocating, like the world was closing in around me, like I was in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I tried to think to calm myself down, but how could I? How could anyone stay calm in the face of something like this? I couldn't stop the truck again. I couldn't risk it. I knew now that if I did, if I gave those things another chance to get close, I wouldn't be able to drive away. They wouldn't let me. I heard a faint noise, something that sounded like a low hum, a buzz in the back of my head. For a moment, I thought it was just my nerves. But no, it was real. The air around me seemed to thicken, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end once again. I slammed my foot down even harder, pushing the truck as fast as it could go. The desert flew by in a blur, the dim light of the early morning sun stretching across the land, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to move with me. I kept expecting to see one of those figures appear in front of me, to step into the road like they always had. But they didn't. They didn't have to. They were already here. I don't know how long I drove, but the tension only grew. The world outside felt more and more oppressive, like I was driving through some kind of living nightmare. The shadows in the periphery of my vision didn't seem to want to leave me. They were always there, lurking just beyond the edge of my truck's headlights. Every now and then, I'd glance over, and I'd see them standing along the road, just out of reach. But no matter how much I stared, they never came closer. They just watched. It wasn't until I saw the sign that I knew I had to stop. I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. But the fuel gauge was on empty, and I had no choice. I was out of gas, stuck in the middle of nowhere with no way to move forward. The sign I saw, a faded relic from a bygone time, read, "Last stop, 20 miles." The desperation in my gut flared. I had to make it to the gas station. It was my only chance. I cursed under my breath. There was no other choice. I had to pull over. I slowed the truck down, the tires humming against the pavement as I pulled into the lonely stretch of road that marked the end of my journey for the moment. The station was just a small, rundown shack that looked like it had been there since the 1950s. It didn't have much. A few pumps, a dim flickering light above the door, and a faded sign that said, "Gas, snacks, and more." I parked the truck and stepped out, my boots crunching on the gravel beneath my feet. The desert was quiet, unnervingly so. The air was thick with dust, and the sun, now fully risen, cast an orange glow across the landscape. For a moment, I almost forgot about the shadows, about the strange figures I'd seen, but that feeling didn't last. I walked into the gas station, the bell above the door jingling as I entered. The interior was just as run down as the outside. Old, dusty shelves lined with outdated snacks and a few cans of gas additives. The cashier, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and tired eyes, didn't look up when I came in. He was scribbling something on a piece of paper, lost in his own world. I stood there for a second, wondering if I was even going to get a chance to fill up. But then he looked up, his tired gaze meeting mine. And that's when I saw it. His eyes. They were the same cold, hollow eyes I'd seen in the figures. The same eyes I'd seen on that man in the tattered suit. And when he spoke, his voice was as cold and distant as the desert wind. "You shouldn't have stopped here." I froze. And then, in that moment, I knew. The desert wasn't just empty. It wasn't just a stretch of highway leading nowhere. It was alive. Alive in ways that no one could explain. And somehow, I had crossed into something that I would never be able to understand, no matter how much I tried. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, only to find the cashier gone. The station was empty. I was alone now. The feeling of being watched crept back into my skin like cold fingers, slowly, steadily, until it was all I could feel. My breath quickened as I spun around, glancing over my shoulder at the windows, the door, any place where something or someone could be hiding. The door to the gas station, the bell ringing softly behind me, felt like a trap, a sick joke that I didn't find funny anymore. I cursed under my breath, fumbling for my keys. I needed to get out of here. The shadows outside, those same tall, thin figures, were no longer just standing along the roadside. They were closer. I could feel it. Their presence was unmistakable. The way they bled into the corner of my vision, the way they never made a sound. They were here. I stepped forward, cautiously, toward the truck. The gravel crunched beneath my boots like it was trying to warn me. I swung the door open and climbed inside, locking it behind me. I glanced out the window, the hairs on my arms prickling, and saw them, more of them now, scattered around the area, pacing along the outskirts of the gas station. I couldn't make out details, not in the half-light, but I knew they were watching me. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine humming to life, and immediately slammed the truck into drive, my foot heavy on the gas. The truck lurched forward, bouncing on the uneven ground, but I didn't care. I just needed to move fast. The road stretched out ahead of me like a never-ending ribbon of blacktop, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Everything was wrong. The darkness was oppressive, the air thick and heavy. I could feel the truck's headlights pushing against the shadows, yet they seemed to devour the light, pulling it away until the road in front of me was barely visible. That's when I saw it. The first one, standing right in the middle of the road. At first, I thought I was seeing things, but no. There was a figure, its head tilted slightly forward, as if waiting for me. It was tall, impossibly tall, its body too thin, like something that didn't belong. It had no face, just darkness where its features should have been. My foot slammed on the brake, but it was too late. The truck skidded forward, tires screaming against the pavement. I jerked the wheel to the side, narrowly avoiding the figure, but when I looked back, there it was again, just standing in the middle of the road. No movement, no attempt to step aside. The thing was waiting for me. A gut-wrenching chill ran through me. Asterisk how? How could it be in front of me again? Asterisk. I swerved again, desperately trying to avoid it. But each time, the figure was there, waiting for me, stepping closer and closer. The air grew colder, the truck's heater doing nothing to combat the frozen dread creeping into my bones. This wasn't just some strange coincidence. This was something worse, something intelligent. I slammed my foot on the gas again, not caring about speed anymore. I could feel the sweat on my brow, my hands trembling as they gripped the wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. Every inch of me screamed for escape, but there was nowhere to go. The figures in the distance were now closer, many of them lining the road, all of them looking at me with those blank, soulless stares. It was like I was the prey. It wasn't much, just a worn, rusted sign that read, "End of Route 66" in faded, chipped paint, a symbol of the road's legacy, the end of its journey. I almost laughed, a bitter, terrified chuckle that felt wrong in my throat. This wasn't the end of my journey. This was just the beginning of something much worse. The road narrowed, and I realized I was speeding toward a dead end. The landscape ahead of me was darker than before, like the world itself had folded into shadows. There were no more signs, no more lights, just blackness and a feeling of being completely alone. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I slammed the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt, the tires locking up, but it didn't matter. The figures were there, everywhere now. They emerged from the blackness like smoke, drifting closer, their movements unnatural and silent. There were no footsteps. There were no sounds, just the feeling of being surrounded, of being trapped. I sat frozen, hands clenched around the wheel, my breath caught in my throat. The air was suffocating now, heavy with something I couldn't describe. The truck's headlights were barely enough to push through the dark, casting long, twisting shadows in every direction. I could see their outlines, slender, featureless, like nothing human. They had no faces, no expressions, nothing to tell me what they wanted. One of them, tall and thin with a long coat, stepped forward. It stopped directly in front of the truck, its movements slow, deliberate. My heart raced. I didn't know what to do. There was no running, no way out. I wasn't on the road anymore. I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, one that didn't have an end. The figure raised one long, spindly arm and pointed at me. The gesture was deliberate, like it had been waiting for this moment. I thought it was going to say something I couldn't understand, but there were no words. Just an overwhelming sense of cold, the kind that made my bones ache, the kind that made my skin crawl. The truck's engine sputtered, stalling in the silence. The headlights flickered, and then the world went dark. For a moment, I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing made sense anymore. And then I heard it, a voice. It wasn't human. It was ancient, distant, as though it had been whispering in my ear from a world far away. It spoke one word, one chilling word: leave. The truck's engine roared back to life. The headlights flashed, illuminating the figure once more, but something had changed. Its outline had become more defined, more real. I could see its face now, empty, like a void, a blackness that seemed to consume the light. My body screamed to move, but my legs didn't respond. I didn't know how long I sat there, trapped in that moment, staring into the abyss of the figure's face. I didn't care anymore. I wasn't just scared, I was lost. But then, something pulled me out of it. Something deep inside me, buried under the fear and panic, gave me the strength to act. I slammed the truck into reverse. My hands fumbled with the gear shift, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from them. I threw the truck into drive and hit the gas, tearing away from the dark figures, leaving them behind in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. I don't know how long I drove after that. I don't know if I was awake, if I was dreaming, or if I was dead. I just kept going faster and faster until I reached a town, any asterisk town, where I could feel the daylight again. I stopped there at some random diner in the middle of nowhere. I still couldn't bring myself to go inside though. I just sat in my truck, staring into the empty desert, waiting for it all to end. But it hasn't ended. Not really. I still see them sometimes. Those figures, those shadow striders, they appear in the corner of my vision. They walk along the road, just out of reach, always watching. I don't know if they're real, or if they've become part of my mind. But I know this much: they never leave me. And no matter how far I drive, I can feel them following me. I've learned not to stop at night, not even for a second. I've learned that the road isn't just a place. It's something else, something alive, something that isn't done with me yet. And if you ever find yourself on Route 66, alone in the dark, remember my warning. Don't stop for the shadow striders. Don't ever stop, because once you do, you might never leave. That's the end of the story, Riley Garner's terrifying encounter on Route 66. But I can tell you right now, I'm not sure he's ever truly gotten away from it. Those things are still out there, waiting for anyone foolish enough to stop. If you've got a road story of your own, or if you've experienced something that sounds like this, feel free to share it. Maybe you can make sense of what I never could. And whatever you do, stay on the road. Keep moving. Never stop. If you actually enjoyed these stories, please subscribe and leave us a comment to the next horror story you'll want us to tell. Till then, see you in the next one.